Need help? Email Dale at help@trustdale.com. You're tuned in to Trust Dale Radio. Here's your consumer investigator, Dale Cardwell.
Hey, everybody. Thank you for listening today. This is the segment that generally rates the highest every time we talk about it, because it's one of those opportunities to be in the privacy of your car or the privacy of your home and hear about what do you do if the unthinkable happens, and that unthinkable is the breakup of a marriage. Lee Meriwether from Meriwether and Tharp is our expert today. Lee, how are you?
Fantastic. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Our pleasure. It's always our pleasure. For lots of folks, they get a divorce and are ready to move on with their lives, but often the relationship between the now former couple doesn't end there. Many times the parties still have to sell a house or divide a retirement account after the divorce. Other times the parties have kids together, which means they still have to co-parent the children and support them financially. As we all know, life is rarely static. Things are always changing, which can mean that the divorce documents no longer work for the parties. And joining us, as I said, is Lee Meriwether, Trustdale's certified family law expert, to talk with us about what happens after a divorce and what people need to be thinking about after their divorce. And Lee, if you don't mind, we're going to take a moment, because your team has lost an important member, proving that life is never static. So bring us up to speed.
Yeah, thanks for this opportunity. I just wanted to give our condolences to the family of Shauna Chester. For the first time ever, Meriwether and Tharp has lost a team member, and she unfortunately was killed in a tragic car accident on early Friday morning. And she was a terrific team member. She was a paralegal that supported a great team at Meriwether and Tharp. It was made up of 4 lawyers: Georgetta Glaves Innes, Lisa Marie Chambers, Melanie DeVictor, and Ryan Schaefer. And so they're impacted pretty hard. And I think she was even Georgetta's paralegal for 13 years. So it was one of those things where, and she was 33, survived by 4 children. So
our hearts go out to her family.
Yes,
and our prayers.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Okay, I know that we're all people of faith here, and so you depend on your higher power to help you through this time, without a doubt. So, Lee, when the divorce is over, what are some common problems you see with people trying to split everything?
Well, one of the things we see is that there'll be situations where people will say, well, I'll take care of it tomorrow, and they'll procrastinate, and you never know what might happen. There was a case where an individual, the wife never followed through with the husband to divide an IRA, and he wound up liquidating it. And so she sued him for contempt, but by the time she went after him about 15 years later, the money was gone. But if she had acted on it right after her divorce, she would have gotten the money, and he wouldn't have been able to spend it. Yes, he was held in contempt and thrown in jail, but that didn't get her the money.
I was amazed. One time I covered a story of a police officer who went into his wife's credit union and withdrew her entire bank accounts, tens of thousands of dollars.
Good grief!
After the divorce,
right?
Because he still had access to it, and he was not prosecuted.
Wow!
Yeah, he was held civilly liable, but not criminally liable, and so that's one of those things that she did not make certain that he didn't have access to her account.
Right. So
one of those loose ends.
Yep, and one of the things you should usually we recommend that changing all your passwords to all your accounts, and definitely taking people off the accounts. That's you should do that within 30 days. Make sure they're removed from the accounts, and then some people just they'll forget about it, or they won't double check on things. Let's say the husband stayed in the marital home and the wife moved out, and the husband was supposed to refinance in 6 months. And 6 months go by, the ex-wife never really follows up on it. She goes to buy a house, and then lo and behold, sitting on her credit is this outstanding mortgage for the house that he was supposed to refinance.
That's tough, Lee. So can I depend on Meriwether and Tharp to give me kind of a roadmap to say, hey, by this date, this needs to have happened?
Yeah, when we do our settlement agreements, they are laid out 99% of the time. There's laid out deadlines for people to act. And we tend to have a email that follows up just reminding people. Now, we don't take care of them afterwards. We sort of say, hey, we give them a reminder. Put this on your calendar. Literally create a calendar entry. I mean, not everybody, most people use smartphones now. Put on your smartphone an entry, like a 1 hour entry saying, hey, so-and-so or you are supposed to do this by this date, so it pops up as a reminder so that you don't forget about it.
So this is a big deal. What can you do in regard to an enforcement issue? How do you handle that if someone's not doing what they're supposed to do?
So the courts have a certain level of relief, and that relief is called contempt action. So you would file a contempt action against the party that wasn't complying. You see that we've had to do a few in the past year where the husband, or actually in each time it was the husband, was absolutely refusing to refinance for whatever reason. He was giving one excuse after the next, but it was negatively impacting the wife's credit, especially for the husband that wasn't making his mortgage payment on time. And so we file for contempt, and in many instances we'll give the court can throw the person in jail to enforce it. But a lot of times we'll say, look, Judge, why don't we reschedule this for 30 days? He's got 30 days to put it on the market with a real estate agent of our choosing or something like that. And we try to fashion some remedies, provided that remedy doesn't change the original settlement agreement. So that's difficult to explain here, but it's important that the court doesn't give a remedy that can be overturned on appeal, but basically says you've got 30 days to fix this. If you don't, you need to report to the jail.
That's toughly because you have money issues with kids, and you don't want to disrupt the earning cycle of the husband or the wife, and so that becomes really touchy, doesn't it?
It does become a very, very sensitive area, and usually when we represent clients, that's one of the things we explain to them. Now you understand that there's a practical consequence of if it's in this case a husband being thrown in jail and you're depending on them for child support and alimony, there will be a consequence for this behavior. Now on the flip side, most of these guys, they don't want to go to jail. They don't want to lose their job. So it's that's why we tend to, unless there's an emergency reason, give them sort of a 30-day grace period, but we get in front of the judge, and the judge will say, sir, I had one, I don't know, about 8 months ago where the judge said, sir, I could have thrown you in jail today, but they didn't ask for that. They asked for you to get 30 days to get get everything straight, and we're going to come back in 30 days, and if you hadn't, you better bring your toothbrush.
Oh, gosh. Well, the demeanor of the way you guys approach this, it's like, look, take a deep breath. We're here to make certain that everything works the way you both agreed for it to work, which is a much better way. What can you do to get what you've been awarded in the divorce? And there's reluctance to do that.
So that's the biggest, the most powerful force is the contempt action by filing it. Usually what we recommend to people before you rush off to the courthouse to file a strong letter sent usually by email, mail, and certified mail, just 3 different ways. That way there's no way they can say, well, I didn't get it. But reinforcing, hey, you were supposed to do X by this date, and it's written very firmly but nicely at the same time, but basically saying, hey, look, we're going to have to take it to the next level if you don't comply. And then when we go to court, the judges normally, there's rare exceptions, but often they will award attorney's fees. If they find someone in contempt of court, they will award the other person their attorney's fees back.
So if someone has been ordered to pay child support or alimony, what can they do if they've just lost their job? That's the flip side of that.
Yeah, so you have those that happen. It happens a lot. Really happened in 2008 when the economy tanked. A lot of people lost their jobs, and typically what you have to do is, when someone calls us about this issue, our usual recommendation is to say, hey, look, what sort of odds do you think you'll be getting a job soon? And if it looks like they're going to get a job soon, rather than spending money filing something, wait to see if they can get a job in a few months. And if they can't, we file for a modification. If it looks like it may be a long time period to get a new job, we go ahead and file for a modification, ask for some sort of temporary relief.
Are the kids entitled to a portion of the unemployment benefits during that period?
Well, I mean, his obligation is to pay, or her, but the obligation is to pay a percentage of their income based on the child support worksheets.
Makes sense. You can learn more about Meriwether and Tharp by going to trustdale.com. You'll find a couple of dozen different practices because guess what, folks? Life happens and you need an attorney. And
yes, so
these folks are the ones that we trust to handle the dissolution of a marriage, but they also try to keep you together. It's a good thing. We'll be right back.
Scam artists don't want you to listen. You're tuned in to Trust Dale Radio. Here's your consumer investigator, Dale Cardwell.
So we're talking with Lee Meriwether of Meriwether and Tharp, and I tell you, Lee, I think one thing that you guys are really, really good at is keeping the emotion tamped down and the anger and the bitterness and trying to get both spouses to a point where they can move on with their lives, not harm the kids, because that anger, bitterness, and animosity just comes back and haunts the kids. And so, but we're talking about what do you do for the things you don't expect after the marriage is dissolved. If someone is ordered to pay child support and suddenly loses their job, if the dad loses his job, Lee, does he still have to pay child support?
He does, as long as there's a court order in place. He's got to pay child support under that court order, and it creates a lot of tension because he may not have any money. And there was actually I didn't follow what ultimately happened with it, but had gotten so bad at one point that somebody filed a lawsuit on behalf of all the dads. This was during that big, the Great Recession, as they call it, because these dads couldn't get a job, and then they'd finally get a job, but some of these judges would throw them in jail so quickly that they'd lose the job they just got.
Because there had been pressure and attention for decades over deadbeat dads.
There had been.
And probably a lot of the laws and a lot of the judges were sensitive to not being accused of letting something like that drag.
Yes, and then, that's kind of it only takes a few bad apples to spoil the bunch.
Yeah. I remember in the 80s, buddy, doing stories about deadbeat dads.
Oh, yeah. It's been a bad problem.
Yeah. So what does he do if he gets a job making less money?
Well, so now here's a good question that comes up a lot. One of the things the court looks at is, did his change of job, was it a voluntary change or an involuntary change? Because if it was an involuntary change, let's say he was working at a certain business and he had a certain compensation plan, and either the business went under or he got let go for reasons outside his control. And then his best job he could come up with, maybe he was making $30,000 or $40,000 a year less. Well, the court can actually examine, did he not pursue a job making about the same? Is he voluntarily suppressing his income or anything like that? So it does create a challenge sometimes. And one of the other things the court looks at, was his job loss voluntary? And a voluntary job loss would be, well, I decided not to be a car salesman and I've decided to go into ministry. And there was actually a case like that. I can't remember if it was Georgia or Florida, where a guy was making about $120,000 a year, and he decided he wanted to go into ministry. That sounded like a great calling.
But now he's making $1.5 million. No, I figured,
Ouch. Yeah.
Well, I bet he wished.
He's got good hair. He's got great hair.
Yes.
He went down to about $35,000 a year.
Oof.
And the court said that was a voluntary change and that we're not going to let the kids suffer for that, and hit him with child support based on him still making the $120,000.
And here's an example of a couple that I know from back in the day. This was 15 years ago. Got a divorce, did not use Meriwether and Tharp. He was bitter because she got a boyfriend who was well off. And so he's angry, and he's like, well, she's doing great. He's got more money. He's got money to burn. I'm just not going to pay child support. And he wound up in the pokey.
That's the way it works.
But not because he couldn't afford it. He was so angry.
Right.
He just could not get past his anger. It's really sad. So what does a mom do when she suspects the father is artificially suppressing his income or hiding it?
Well, these can be challenging ones too. We counter them. We counter with a certain level of frequency. Oh, going back to the voluntary, I wanted to add one thing. There have been situations where people get fired because of problems on the job or drinking or stuff like that. That's considered a voluntary job loss, because if you knew that you could get fired for drinking on the job and you lost your job because of it, then you voluntarily were drinking, that resulted in your job loss. So that's
interesting. I would not have thought about that. Yeah.
So I just want to toss that out there. But to go back to the other question, so we have those that happen. Sometimes it's just the way people look at it, meaning you have a small business owner, and he says, well, here's my tax returns. It says I only make $60,000 a year. And the wife says, yeah, but when we were married, or the ex-wife says, when we were married, we enjoyed this lifestyle and this and that. And so what you look at his tax returns, you dig a little deeper, and you see he's running his cell phone through the business. He's running his $800 a month car payment through the business. He's writing off a portion of his house through the business. And so while those would be legitimate under IRS guidelines for the purposes of determining child support, they get included in his income. Because it's basically paying some of his personal expenses. He's just running it through his business.
And I covered a story once where the lady lived an opulent lifestyle. They had 2 kids, and the divorce happened, and suddenly on paper, the guy's making $40,000 a year, $35,000 a year, because he didn't declare his drug sales earnings.
Shoot. Now he's in trouble.
And, she had no idea. But she knew she was living in the lap of luxury. That's a true story.
Wow.
Stranger things have happened.
And we've had cases, too, where you look at the person's, they claim they make $2,000 a month, and you look at their lifestyle, and I'm like, well, their expenses, their outflows about $10,000 a month. So there's something missing here. And you start digging deeper, and you learn that the husband's actually working, and he's, rather than him getting paid for his time, his new wife is collecting the money. So her income looks fine, but his income looks low.
Can you go after that?
If you think that that's a fraudulent transfer, that's called yes, you can go after that. There can also be a suppression of his income. He's intentionally taking steps to suppress his income, so the court can impute income to him, even though under the IRS, what he's filing with the IRS, he only makes $2,000 a month. The court can impute more if he's living a certain lifestyle that shows something different. So that's one of the things we do. We do an income versus spending analysis, and one of my most bizarre ones, we found that the person was living a very nice lifestyle, but claiming in court documents he only made $2,000 a month. We were able to get a hold of his credit report and his credit cards, and we saw most of his expenses going on credit cards, but every other month one of the credit cards would be paid off. It would be $10,000 here, $12,000 there, $11,000 here. Turns out his employer was an offshore company. The employment part was legitimate, but they were paying his expenses through his credit cards. They were paying off his credit cards every month, and so, but not reporting as an income.
And
Fascinating.
Thought he could get away with it.
Yes.
Yeah, right. So kids' lives are always changing, and in our ever-moving society, people find themselves moving a lot. What should someone do when there's been a major change in circumstances with the children or the parents?
Well, the first thing we try to suggest when someone comes to us, the first thing we try to do is talk to them about, okay, what is the issue? And is it something that the parents can sit down and have a conversation about? Because rather than just turning around and filing an action with the court, that always stirs up the emotion. It involves the children, like you talked about earlier. And if we can avoid that by having a conversation ahead of time, we try to. Sometimes you can even, let's say the parties want to resolve it, and they're hesitant to go to court, but they can't come to an agreement. You can even have a mediation ahead of time before filing anything with the court. But if that doesn't work, let's say a parent has just decided, I'm going to move to Alaska, and I'm taking the children with me. The other parent could come to court and ask the court to determine the wisdom of that move, and the court could change custody to the parent that's staying in Georgia.
Are the tables still tilted toward the mom in that situation?
I think that is county dependent in many situations, and I think it's very fact dependent. I think judges now are much more open to fathers, I think, as a general rule, and that's because of more moms are working now. So I think it's just a whole overall societal change.
Very interesting. Gosh, I can't believe this is over. Lee, how do people find Meriwether and Tharp?
Well, you can find us on trustdale.com.
Is that $5?
Or you can find us at mtlawoffice.com, mtlawoffice.com.
And folks, we're addressing Georgia listeners right now, but they can serve you because they're all over the metro area. It's a great firm to call. We'll see you next time.